What would you think if I told you that the most dangerous kind of love is not the one that ends, but the one that consumes? That somewhere between affection and control, admiration and possession, there exists a silent war between the masculine and feminine unconscious, a war disguised as romance. He thought he loved her, but what he really wanted was to own her reflection, to freeze the living mystery of her soul into a portrait he could hang in the gallery of his ego. Every glance she gave that wasn't directed at him felt like betrayal. Every silence, a rebellion. Because deep down, he didn't desire her freedom, he desired her submission. And like countless men before him, he mistook control for connection. She, however, was not of this world's ordinary women. She carried in her eyes that haunting distance, the kind that speaks to eternity. She had touched something in herself that words couldn't contain. She had descended into her own shadow, where fear and beauty coexisted like twin serpents, and from there she emerged not as someone's possession, but as something untamable. And that was what terrified him most. Because when a woman belongs to the unknown, when she walks with her own darkness instead of running from it, she becomes immune to manipulation. You can seduce her, but you cannot own her. You can admire her, but you cannot define her. You can love her deeply, but you cannot cage her essence. She belongs not to a man, not to the world, but to the vast, infinite mystery that gave her life. Men like him, though, are haunted by such women. They project upon them the image of salvation, the anima, Jung called it, the inner feminine they've never met within themselves. They chase her because she reflects their own lost soul. But the tragedy is, once they catch her, they try to kill what makes her divine. They want her light, yet they fear her fire. So he tried to break her rhythm, tried to make her smaller, quieter, more predictable. He didn't realize that every time he demanded her obedience, he was revealing his own lack of inner sovereignty. The man who cannot face his own chaos seeks to dominate the chaos of another. He cannot integrate his darkness, so he controls hers. But the feminine spirit cannot live in the cage of another man's fear. It decays there. It withers. A woman cannot bloom where she must constantly apologize for her magnitude. And when she finally wakes to that truth, when she feels the soul scream rising from within, demanding liberation, no amount of guilt or affection will keep her in bondage. He felt it the day she stopped explaining herself. The day her silence no longer sought understanding, but became a boundary. When she looked at him not with anger, but with clarity, the kind of clarity that ends illusions. That was when he realized she was no longer a mirror. She was a storm. And yet, the tragedy of this story is not that he lost her. It's that he never truly met her. He loved the image of her, the projection, the fantasy, not the vast, pulsating truth of who she was. Because to love her would mean to face his own unlived life. It would mean confronting his own feminine nature, the emotions he suppressed, the tenderness he feared, the vulnerability he mocked in others. But he couldn't. He was raised to believe that power meant control, and control meant safety. So he tried to master her mystery instead of surrendering to it. And she, the woman who belonged to the unknown, felt his fear wrapping around her like a vine. She knew that if she stayed, her own light would dim to match his comfort. So she chose the wilderness. She chose the path with no map, the silence where her heart could breathe again. Have you ever known that kind of choice? The one that rips you in half, but also saves your soul? The moment when you realize that love without freedom is just another form of captivity? That's where her power was born, in that decision to walk away from the illusion of belonging. For she understood what he did not, that to truly love, one must first be whole. And no one who seeks possession can offer wholeness. So she walked, not out of spite, but out of sacred remembrance. She walked because her destiny was not to orbit around another's ego, but to dance with the cosmos itself. She walked because the unknown was calling her name, and she could no longer pretend not to hear it. The world would call her cold, detached, heartless. But the truth? She was on fire. She burned for her own becoming. She burned for the woman she had once buried beneath compromise and fear. And as she disappeared beyond the horizon of his understanding, something inside him broke, the shell of the man who thought he could possess beauty without worshipping its mystery. He was left staring into the absence she left behind, forced at last to confront his own reflection in the void. For the first time, he wasn't chasing her shadow. He was meeting his own. He sat alone in the silence she left behind, and that silence was merciless. It echoed through the chambers of his mind like a voice older than language. Every attempt to remember her brought not peace, but confrontation, for her absence had become a mirror, and in it he saw the man he had refused to become. He realized that his love had not been love at all. It was hunger. The hunger to fill the void of his own unlived emotions. The hunger to possess what he could not embody. And that hunger, dressed as devotion, had devoured everything sacred between them. The truth is that possession is the language of the unawakened. When a man cannot master his own soul, he seeks to master another's. The one who fears his inner chaos turns every relationship into a battlefield, not because he loves war, but because he has never known peace within himself. He began to see it now, how every demand, every attempt to control, was not about her at all, but about the fragments of himself he refused to meet. She had only triggered what was buried in the dark. The jealousy, the insecurity, the desperate need to be seen, they weren't born from her mystery, but from his denial of his own. And somewhere in that realization, he began to break. For the masculine soul that clings to dominance is one terrified of death. Not physical death, but the death of the ego. Jung called it the encounter with the shadow, the descent into the unknown terrain of the self, where everything one fears to admit becomes illuminated. And now, stripped of her reflection, he had nowhere left to hide. Men like him are raised on myths of conquest, to believe that love is something to be won, women something to be earned, and power something to be proven. But real power is not conquest. Real power is containment. It is the ability to hold presence without control, to touch without grasping, to love without owning. She had known that instinctively, even before her awakening. That was what drew him in, not her beauty, but her energy. Her connection to the eternal feminine, the same archetype that moves through every woman who refuses to be defined by someone else's story. She was the embodiment of the anima mundi, the world soul, and he, still trapped in the smallness of self, tried to make the infinite fit inside his fragile hands. It is a universal tragedy. Men fall in love with women who mirror the divine feminine within themselves, but instead of bowing to that mirror, they try to capture it. They mistake the reflection for the source. And in doing so, they lose both her and themselves. But for her, this loss was not death. It was initiation. When she walked away, she entered a different kind of solitude, not the loneliness of rejection, but the solitude of self-communion. In that silence, she remembered who she was before the world taught her to shrink. She sat with her shadows, the parts of her once labeled too emotional, too sensitive, too much, and realized they were not flaws, but forgotten fragments of power. For the woman who belongs to the unknown must make peace with her darkness. She must descend into the underworld of her psyche and retrieve her truth. That's where her radiance is born, not from denial, but from integration. The light that refuses to look at its own shadow is not light, but illusion. She began to see her past through different eyes. Every relationship that demanded she become smaller, quieter, easier, they were all teachers. Each one revealed where she had abandoned herself. Each heartbreak was a mirror, showing her the parts of her soul she had given away for the illusion of safety. And in that realization, forgiveness bloomed, not for him, but for herself. For all the times she mistook control for care, intensity for intimacy, and attention for love. That's when she understood the secret that few ever grasp. Love is not about merging with another, but meeting the divine within both souls. It's not about losing yourself in passion, but remembering yourself through connection. The true union is not physical, but psychological, the dance between the masculine and feminine within. As she healed, something extraordinary happened. The very energy he once tried to control became her liberation. The pain he caused became the portal to her awakening. She realized that no one can truly possess what is infinite, and she was infinite. Meanwhile, he wandered in the ruins of his projections, haunted by the echo of her freedom. He began to sense that the only way to find her again was not through pursuit, but transformation. The unknown that she belonged to, that vast, mystical territory of soul, was also calling him. But to answer it, he would have to let go of everything he thought he knew about manhood, power, and love. For when a man meets a woman who belongs to the unknown, she does not come to comfort him, she comes to awaken him. And awakening is never gentle. It tears apart illusions, burns through pride, and demands death before rebirth. And somewhere deep within his wounded masculine heart, the seed of that rebirth was beginning to tremble. The days turned into nights that bled together, and he began to understand that time does not heal what one refuses to confront. In her absence, everything he had buried surfaced like ghosts rising from the depths. The facade of confidence, the armor of dominance, the pride that once held him upright, all began to dissolve under the unbearable weight of self-awareness. He remembered the way she looked at him, not the gaze that adored, but the gaze that saw. There was a difference. She had seen through him, not because she wanted to judge, but because she couldn't help but perceive the truth. Her intuition had always been a mirror of his unconscious, revealing the cracks he spent a lifetime hiding. And now, stripped of her reflection, he faced himself, the boy who learned that vulnerability was weakness, that control was safety, that emotions were threats to masculinity. This was the beginning of his descent, the dark night of the soul that every man must one day walk through if he is to evolve. Jung called it individuation, the process of becoming whole by integrating the unconscious with the conscious. But for him, it felt like death. He saw for the first time that he had not loved her, he had idolized her. He had turned her into the living symbol of everything missing within himself. She was not merely a woman to him, she was his anima, the embodiment of his own repressed emotions, his creative potential, his intuitive depth. By trying to possess her, he was really trying to possess his own soul. But the soul cannot be owned. It can only be honored. In this realization, something broke open. He fell to his knees, not in defeat, but in surrender, the sacred kind of surrender that strips the ego bare. For the first time, he allowed himself to weep. And in those tears was the cleansing of lifetimes, the grief of every moment he had betrayed his inner truth for the illusion of control. Meanwhile, far away, she too was changing. Her solitude had ripened into wisdom. She no longer carried the ache of wanting to be understood. She had transcended the need for validation, because she had met herself in the fire. When a woman returns from the underworld of her own psyche, she no longer seeks love from the wounded masculine. She becomes love itself. Her presence no longer asks, "Will you choose me?" It declares, "I have already chosen myself." That declaration carries a vibration that can heal or destroy, depending on who hears it. For the awakened feminine does not nurture weakness. She awakens strength. And when a man meets such a woman, he is faced with two choices: evolve or retreat. He chose evolution. Slowly, painfully, authentically, he began to observe his mind, the constant need to control, to label, to define. He practiced stillness. He studied silence. And in the silence, he began to hear his own truth whispering, that real masculinity is not domination, but depth. He found Seneca's words in an old book, "No man is free who is not master of himself." That line pierced him like lightning. For all his life, he had sought freedom through power, yet power had only enslaved him to his fears. True mastery, he now saw, was not the conquest of another, but the conquest of the self. He began to meet the parts of himself he had exiled, the tenderness he once mocked, the compassion he had hidden behind sarcasm, the longing he had numbed with ambition. And with each encounter, the boy within him grew quieter, less afraid. He started to feel, truly feel, without needing to control the feeling. And through that process, the image of her changed. She was no longer the woman he lost, but the catalyst he needed. She had been the bridge between his unconscious and his awakening. Her departure had been his initiation. Have you ever noticed how the most painful endings often hold the keys to your transformation? That the love that breaks you open is the same love that births your higher self? That's what she was, the crack in his armor through which light entered. And as months passed, something remarkable unfolded. The same energy he once projected onto her, that mysterious, radiant, intuitive force, began to rise within him. He started to create again, to write, to feel the rhythm of life moving through him. He stopped chasing and began becoming. He no longer wanted to possess her. He wanted to meet her again, not as a half, but as a whole. Not as the man who feared her freedom, but as one who revered it. And though he did not know where she was, he could feel her presence, not as a person to be found, but as a principle to be lived. The unknown she belonged to was no longer outside of him, it had become his home too. For the true alchemy of love is not union through attachment, but union through evolution. In the stillness of his rebirth, he understood. She had never left to escape him. She had left to awaken him. And through her absence, she had done exactly that. Seasons changed, and time, once his tormentor, became his teacher. The man who once tried to possess the infinite had now learned the sacred art of reverence. He no longer sought to capture beauty, he sought to witness it. He no longer clung to love, he flowed with it. What once was obsession had matured into understanding, and what once was control had transformed into compassion. He began to notice the subtle patterns that life reveals only to the still heart, how every encounter, every heartbreak, every loss, was never punishment, but preparation. The woman who had once walked away had left behind more than silence. She had left a door open, a portal into the unknown. And one day, as he sat beneath a sky painted with the last light of dusk, he felt her presence again, not in body, not in memory, but in essence. She was there, in the breath of the wind, in the curve of the horizon, in the quiet certainty that nothing truly belonging to the soul is ever lost. For she was never his to keep, she was his to remember. He now understood that love is not possession, it is permission. Permission for another to be entirely themselves, without fear of being diminished or devoured. Love is not holding on, it is holding space. In his stillness, he could finally see the architecture of the feminine, how her mystery is not a riddle to be solved, but a universe to be honored. How her silence speaks louder than her words. How her distance is not rejection, but sacred protection of her essence. And far away, she too had changed. The woman who once walked into the wilderness had found home within herself. She no longer looked for completion in anyone's eyes. The ache that once demanded to be understood had become quiet, not from resignation, but from fulfillment. She had merged with the unknown she once belonged to, and in doing so, she had become it. Her power was now effortless. Her presence, magnetic. She did not chase, nor did she flee. She simply was. The kind of woman who no longer seeks love as validation, but emanates love as vibration. The kind of woman who can stand in the midst of chaos and remain unshaken, because her roots are buried in the eternal. When she thought of him, there was no bitterness, only gratitude. For she knew now that every man who tries to possess a woman like her is not her enemy, but her mirror. Each one comes to reveal where she has yet to choose herself completely. And when she does, the dynamic dissolves, replaced by clarity. That is the secret of the awakened feminine. She does not fight for freedom. She remembers she was never bound. Their souls, though separated by distance, continued their silent dialogue in the language of growth. For the masculine and feminine are not enemies. They are the two wings of the same bird. One cannot ascend without the other. He had to learn surrender. She had to learn trust. And through the friction of their meeting, both had evolved. It was no longer a story of love lost, but of consciousness found. The man who once tried to possess her had finally discovered the feminine within himself, the intuition, the softness, the emotional honesty he once feared. And she, in embracing her sovereignty, had integrated the sacred masculine, the focus, the grounded strength, the stillness that allows creation to take form. Together, though apart, they completed the alchemical circle, the eternal dance of polarity returning to wholeness. And so, the tale ends not in reunion, but in realization. For the truest form of union is not between two bodies, but between two awakened souls who no longer seek completion through each other, because they have found it within themselves. When the masculine learns to feel and the feminine learns to trust, love is no longer a battlefield. It becomes a temple. She walks now under the moonlight, her footsteps silent but certain. The world no longer frightens her, it fascinates her. She belongs to no man, no story, no identity. She belongs to the unknown, to the living pulse of creation itself. And somewhere, perhaps under the same moon, he sits in quiet reverence, whispering a prayer, not of longing but of gratitude. Because now he knows, to love a woman who belongs to the unknown is to meet the divine face to face. She was never his to keep. She was his to awaken. And he was never her to save. He was hers to remind that love, when pure, is not possession, it is liberation. In the stillness of their separate paths, both souls are finally free. And that freedom, that sacred space between them, is where true love finally lives.